Pleasure to be here. It's as you were giving the intro and you sent me an email, it kind of told me the topic. And it made me think. I actually unknowingly was managing risk from the first day I stepped foot on Wall Street. And I say that because B student, Ohio University, journalism degree, 970 SAT, right? I knew that I knew nothing. And that put me so much further ahead than most of my competition because I was teachable. I wanted to learn, but I knew I didn't know anything. And it's like, you hear about, smartest guy in the room. I want to be the dumbest guy in the room because if I'm the smartest guy in the room, I'm in the wrong room. I can't learn from if I'm the smartest person in the room. So, I showed up in Manhattan January 9th, 1994 with a U-Haul and a giant lobster on it that said America Moves from Maine. I had on LL Bean boots, J. Crew jacket, and I was like, let's do this. And I tried to get a job as a journalist or PR, and it didn't go well. And I called my mom up, and she suggested I call my uncle. So I call him up, and before I even managed to sort of tell him what kind of job I needed or wanted, he's like, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. So I'm sitting there and I'm waiting, and he calls me back. He's like, all right. He's like, you got 10 interviews this week. I was like, for what? And he goes, oh, just say you want to get into sales. So I'm a week later, I'm down at 7 World Trade Center. I got my Filene's basement, untailored suit, stack of resumes, and I walk into Lehman Brothers. And, when the opening bell rang, it was much different, without the technology of today. The floor erupted, and I didn't know what I was seeing, but I knew I wanted in. Just the utter grandness of trading really, really appealed to me. And so I ended up getting a job at a place called Morgan Stanley in their private wealth management, which ended up being a great starting place because I learned almost every facet of the business while I was in high net worth retail department. And, I quickly discovered, because, like I said, I knew nothing. During the day, I was next to a guy from Harvard, a woman from Duke, guy from Harvard on my left, woman from Duke on my right. And during the day, I had no chance. I couldn't move the needle. I couldn't stand out. But what I figured out was that at happy hour, I could crush the guy from Harvard. I could crush the woman from Duke, and they didn't stand a chance. And so I kind of realized that the networking part of Wall Street was kind of how I was going to succeed. And it goes very well with trading, right? Because you could be a great trader, but if I've got better information than you, I'm probably going to beat you. So, I became very good at sort of gathering information and getting people to help me, sort of creating my own community. I also, with going out every night, sort of developed a reputation, which was, good and bad. In the 90s, I used to sort of say, like, if you went out with me, two things would happen. Either one, at the end of the night, you'd be like, holy shit, like that dude scares me. Or two, you would be like, I want to party with him again. But the result was the same. You remembered the night that you went out with me. And so it took a while, but slowly but surely I progressed, sort of up the Wall Street chain. And I got a job at a hedge fund called the Galleon Group. And this is where I really sort of cut my teeth and sort of learn the business. And, I kind of felt like fraternity pledge / a dog. Like I sometimes felt like I was going to be hit if I didn't have the right answer. And I really learned a work ethic. I remember, excuse me. My my sort of direct bosses, trader David Slane, asked me to follow up and get some information on a company. And I think I called like 3 people. And then I go back to his desk. I was like, oh, I couldn't find it. And he was like shaking. And like I really legitimately thought he was gonna hit me. And on that day, I kind of realized I was like, okay, like I better never go back to someone without an answer unless I've called 99 people and have like literally an explanation of everything that I've attempted to do. And I mean, I think that also kind of creates good traders in the sense that like you don't stop, do not stop until you get the answer. So at the Galleon Group, my former boss was sentenced to 11 years for insider trading. So there was a lot of shady shit that went on there. So I learned a lot, good and bad. It's also kind of when I stopped sort of making choices based on right and wrong, and I started basing decisions on consequences, which is not a good place to be, because like you start making these choices because you're not going to get away with it, but you eventually might get caught. So here I am, just trading, kind of like whipping it around, very, very short time frame, just trying to chop it up, trying to make money. And eventually I leave with like 5 other people, and I start a hedge fund called Argus Partners. And this is in 2000 and I think it's 2001. And so I started a healthcare hedge fund called Argus. We eventually get to 1.4 billion. Now I really don't have a boss. It's just me. And this is when I really kind of had to show my worth as a trader and, be a student, right? So I'm not reading research reports on Sunday night, although I should have been, I wasn't. I really sort of sunk into, being able to get information, and then, being able to trade off that information. And I eventually was able to sort of create this, I don't know, people have called me the head of the healthcare mafia. So, read into that as you will. But I had a guy, right? I had a guy who did technical analysis. I had a guy who could tell me what was going to be on the cover of Barron's on Monday or on over the weekend. I had a guy who, was in banking. I had a program guy. So I developed this, sort of, I guess you would call it, like reality TV, an alliance. And the way that I did that was, by helping other people. Like we live in a favor economy, right? So the best way to get a favor is to do someone else a favor. So I would get a good call and I would target 2 or 3 people, because if you start to give good calls to too many people, nobody makes money, at least in the hedge fund arena. And so I would start trying to help people. And, sometimes, very, very often, let's say 70% of the time, they'd be like, thanks, thanks, thanks. And they never return the favor, ever. But over time, I would find people who'd be like, dude, thanks. And like the next week, hey, I'm hearing this. And so I stopped giving the, good calls to the takers and started sort of cultivating the relationships of the people who would reciprocate. And, over years, I had an unbelievable Rolodex. There wasn't anything going on Wall Street that I did not know about. I was always one phone call away. And, it also helps, which, the retail is much different, but, when you're trading $1.4 billion, people will do stuff for you, right? So, paying commissions really also helped me sort of catapult to the next level. But so as my partying increased, I became more and more successful. Higher heights, doing crazy, stupid shit. And, it was a lot of fun. And uh, it turned at a certain point, and I didn't really know that. And it was kind of like slow at first, and then, real fast. But, I kept bringing in money. So, no one was really going to tell me what to do. And, fast forward to 2003, I'm celebrating my 34th birthday. I hire this band called Naughty by Nature to perform. I've got 500 friends there. We're all partying. And at the end of the night, a couple of my friends grab me and they're like, Turney, they're like, who are you? I was like, what? They're like, who are you? And I was like, we've been standing here all night and people found out that we know you from school. And they're like, they were like, oh, can you introduce me to Turney? Oh, can you just point who Turney out? Like, and that feeling of being adored was better than crack cocaine. It was better than, $100,000 trade. Like, I was just like, I felt so good. And it immediately went away. Right. And then fast forward like another 3 months, it's Christmas time before online banking. I'm on my couch in my 2,700 square foot apartment in Tribeca, punching in, the dialing the 800 number to Chase. And I punch in my account number and the automated voice goes, your balance is 1,800,300. I hit repeat. Your balance is 1,800,000. Repeat. And I kept hitting it because I thought, well, it did for a second, but the money was making me feel better. And what's interesting is when I was making $22,000 a year, I would say to my friends at the bar, I'd say, if I could just make $50,000 a year, then all of my problems would be solved. If I could get that girl, then I'd be happy. If I could get that promotion, then I'd have a career. So when I'm on the couch, calling Chase Bank, I'm saying to myself, if I could just make $3 million a year, then all of my problems would be solved. And it didn't solve anything. After that, I ended up, kind of got the girl, got the house, got the apartment, got the car, bank account, got everything. Still chasing, like not really ever content. People used to say to me, they're like, Turney's so hardworking. And I'd be like, no, like, I'm just not happy. So that discontent drove me for such a long time. Eventually my girlfriend was pregnant. So I was like, all right, that's it. That's, gonna be the thing that's, kind of stops me. By the second trimester, I was, back at it. Then my daughter was born October 12th, 2005. And I was like, okay, this is it. And 3 days after, the hospital, I'm in this Wall Street crack house, ripping lines, bragging to all these guys, like how magical the delivery room was. Really, really pathetic. But from that point, I kind of was no longer making the decisions. The drugs had completely won. So about a year later, I'm on the corner of 54th and Park Avenue. It's 5 a.m. I hadn't slept in 3 days. I was on a cocaine bender, and it stormed the night before. And I'm looking around, chain smoking cigarettes, I'm practicing saying hello. I'm like, oh, like just trying to like keep it together. But I knew if I called in sick again, I was going to be fired. And if I showed up, for work in the shape that I was in, I was going to be fired. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to fake a mugging. So I go over and I see this puddle, and I just like plop into the puddle. And I don't know if you've ever tried to fall. It's really hard. And so like I stand up and take a couple steps, and I like slam my body into the puddle again. Not good enough. Get up again, running start, like bam, bam, bam. I get up. I'm soaking wet, pants ripped, bloody, like bruised. And I'm limping into this, $1.4 billion hedge fund that I'd started or co-started. And I walk to the main guy, and I just say to him, I'm like, I was mugged. And so I ended up going to rehab in like 48 hours later. And that, I wish that kind of would have been my bottom. It wasn't, but I'm going to go back just a little bit to my Argus days, just so we can talk a little bit about trading. So one of the things, or two of the things that I did that kind of helped me get ahead was, one, I would take, either like slow Fridays or even the weekend or at the bar, I would have conversations with people where I knew the emotional element was not a factor, right? So if a stock's going down and you go talk to an analyst, they're freaking out. They're looking at the price and they're not clear-headed. So what I would do is I would have these conversations and I would kind of dig a little, and they would make these emotionless statements like, oh, if Apple ever got to this price, I would back up the truck, right? And then I would take note, when I'd get back to my desk or whatever. And so I had this like list of things that people would do if they got to certain levels or if something happened. And then when they did happen, I would go to that analyst and I would be like, hey, you said you would back up the truck, if Apple ever got to this level. I'm like, yeah, but the market's down 5% and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, has anything changed? They're like, no, but blah, blah, blah. I'm like, and I'm buying it. And that made me a lot of money because there was zero emotion in the market. And that's kind of what you need. Another thing that I did, which is unconventional, I also traded other people, right? I traded off of other people. We had a biotech analyst who her panic was a buy signal, right? So there were times she'd come running to my desk. She'd be like, Turney. She's like, Biogen's down 5. She's like, what do we do? She's like, oh my God, we got to sell it. And I'd be like, has anything changed? And she's like, no, but it keeps going down. And so I knew when she started to panic, it was probably an indication to at least buy, if buy 10% of your position, right? Something, just put it on the tape, just buy it, watch the market, whatever. We had another guy. So the head guy comes up to me. His name's Christian, and he goes, Turney. He goes, I think we gotta let Matt go. And I was like, what? He's like, he's not doing well. And I was like, I know. I'm like, isn't that great? And he was like looking at me like I was crazy. This guy was always wrong. Like, I'm not even joking. He was always wrong. So all I had to do was the opposite of what he was telling us to do. It was like guaranteed money. And then, like another guy, I knew he had a great, smart call. But he had no balls, right? So when he told me to buy 25, I knew I was supposed to buy 50, right? So I kind of knew how he operated, and I was able to adjust sort of my trading around it. So I did a lot of things that were unconventional, and it also was a different time than today. So I don't know necessarily if that's going to work, and that also sort of will depend on who you're around, what your community is. But I would really stress people to always be improving your community one way or another, right? At the end of every day, everyone focuses on the quantitative result of the day, right? There's a qualitative result too. So, there's going to be days that you lose money. You can still have a great day. If you improve a relationship, form a new relationship, if you help someone else who, let's say, has a good call and potentially could return that. So that is something that you can always be working on, whether it is, it's harder with COVID, but drinks, coffee, picking the brain, whatever. And one of the best ways to do that is by offering them something first. Okay, so where we picked up, I ended up going to rehab, came back, and I was, I wanted to go back to Wall Street, but I was a little hesitant. I was a little nervous of like the party scene. I was like, if it's not private jets and hookers, then do I want to be there? So I ended up going back to a much smaller firm, and now it's harder. I have to be scrappier because I'm not people's first call anymore. So now I really had to lean on my own information and my own ability to help other people. Um, and then there were times, like, I'll just give you a couple of anecdotes. Like, the head of my new hedge fund called Berkowitz, it used to be Jim Cramer's firm. I remember it was Apple again, and he was freaking out because Lehman made a valuation call, and he's like, I know it's going to be down 3, and it was our best name, right? It was our favorite name, and he knew it was going to be down 3, which, yeah, you can trade that, sure, 100% you can trade that. But if it's your best name, I suggest down 3, you put in a bid and you start buying it, right? It's an opportunity to buy more. So you don't have to clip, every single scalp. You want to put yourself in a position, the best position, moving forward. So, sometimes if you can clip a quick dollar, that's great. That's awesome. But if you're selling shares of your favorite name and it's still your favorite name, it's like not a good idea. So you don't want to be too cute, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then, I was working with much younger analysts, and so I really kind of had to sort of get the information out of them. There's a lot of people on Wall Street who have great information and don't know it, and they don't know how to use it. So, you could be home talking to, your friend's father who's a doctor, and obviously you don't want to do anything illegal, but they don't know how to trade it. So it kind of becomes a skill of being able to get the right information out of the right people. So unfortunately, I relapsed. I had this brilliant idea. I said, I'm an addict and an alcoholic. I can't have one drink. I can't have one line. Why not one relapse? So I planned this big night in the city, called my girlfriend and my daughter, said goodnight, and just went after it like a one-man bachelor party. And, like 6 a.m, I'm limping back to my hedge fund, and I'm like saying to myself, I can do that once a quarter. By breakfast, I'm outside smoking a cigarette. And I'm like, I could do that once a month. By the afternoon, I'm thinking, I could probably pull that off once a week. And by the close, I called my girlfriend. I was like, you know what? I'm going to stay in the city one more night. And the wheels eventually came off, and I ended up going back to rehab. And so at this point, I'm living in a 6,000 square foot house that's going into foreclosure. My girlfriend's gone, daughter's gone, friends are far and few between. And I'm kind of faced with, having to sort of reinvent myself and try to stay sober. And so I started selling this research. It was like JV newsletter bullshit. I'm calling, former friends and, foes on Wall Street, trying to sell this $30,000 a year product. And it's embarrassing. And in the middle of like my third pitch, this guy's like, how much are you gonna make this year? I was like, 300, totally lied, but I was just like 300. And he goes, why don't you come back here tomorrow? He goes, I have a 7-figure job, healthcare trader. I was like, oh, okay. So I drive home and I'm like, this doesn't feel right. And so I go back the next day, I meet with human resources, I ace it. They're like, come back tomorrow. And I was like, all right. So I go back a third day, meet all the other traders on the desk, crush it. They're like, all right, we need you to come back one more time, to meet the head of the company. And I was like, all right. So that night I'm like, just didn't feel right. Like I don't know. It wasn't right, but 7-figure job, right? So I go back to the office. I'm sitting there, and I don't know if it was like an outer body experience or just like something came over me, because the guy has got an offer like on his desk, sitting right next to him. And he's like, so he goes, I hear you're a great healthcare trader. And I'm like, actually, I haven't traded healthcare in 5 years. And the guy was like, oh, well, he's like, just so you know, this is a global firm. So you'll be expected to work, very late one night a week. And on some weekends, you're gonna have to work. And I was like, I have a 4-year-old daughter. That doesn't really work for me. And the guy's looking at me like, what is wrong with you? So by the end of it, he kind of like figured out that I was self-sabotaging the interview. And, we just shook hands and I left. And that moment I left Wall Street and I felt free. And, in the years since, so many people have asked me, and I've helped many, many people get into the business and within the business. I think it's an amazing industry. I love trading, but it had run its course, and I was there for the wrong reasons. My motive was to live a fast life, to make a shit ton of money. I didn't love the markets. I just loved the adrenaline and the money, and that was not really the right motive. So that was basically the end of my Wall Street career. Since then, I started writing for CNBC. I did some consulting. I consulted for Billions, a TV show. I was in front of the TV, in front of the camera for a TV show called The Filthy Rich Guide on CNBC. And so I've kind of maintained, staying involved in, I guess you'd call it like wealth porn. And I've learned a lot. And so I wrote a book in 2013. And interestingly enough, I'm sitting there one night and I'm saying to myself, I'm not happy, right? Like, I was sober. I'd gotten through family court. I was talking to my daughter every single day. I just got a big book contract from Random House. I'm like, I'm not happy. And so I went and I looked online for the definition of happiness in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, because I wanted to know, like, what does happiness mean? And what I found out was that back then it was honor, integrity, how you lived your life. And I was like, okay, I thought it was pleasure. And since that day, I decided, I was like, you know what? Fuck happiness. I'm just going to go for serenity. And ironically, I've never been happier. And so fast forward, I write the book and there's some rumblings. My editor calls me up. He's like, Turney, there's some rumblings that you're going to be a New York Times bestseller. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. If I become a New York Times bestseller, everything's going to change and I'm going to have this amazing career, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh my God, I'm doing it again. The whole if then, if I make, $3 million, then I'll be happy. I was like, if I become a New York Times bestseller, then all of these wonderful things are going to happen. And so I caught myself and I was like, okay, doesn't matter. And I've been able to slowly sort of self-correct the whole if then premise that I've lived my life. And it's allowed me just to kind of live a much simpler and freer life. I don't have these attachments that make me, sort of do things and say things and act ways that I wouldn't want to. So that's it in a nutshell. I don't know. I think you wanted to do Q&A or.
Yeah. So just to touch on that, just to add on to your last part, because I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but prior to Wall Street, you was actually studying journalism as well, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So I just find that funny that that's how you started. It took you to Wall Street, and then this is where you ended up now. That's where your true passion is.
It almost feels like, whatever your belief is of, religion or spirituality or whatever, but it almost does feel like I was sent to Wall Street so I could come back and report on it. You know what I mean? It kind of feels like that.
Yeah. Awesome. So just to touch back on the topic of risk. So I know, so you mentioned obviously the high life, the drug life. So we know that, some traders, some Wall Street, some hedge funds, they might be using drugs to manage their emotions, but also they might use drugs because of the money side and just, enjoying life and doing the parties and stuff like that. So for you and in your experience, how should one trader, someone who's maybe managing risk on a everyday basis, on a weekly basis, what do you think should a trader do? Like, should he or she have a routine that they should follow? But yeah, I would love to get your view on that.
I mean, it depends, right? Because every stock or every portfolio um is different. So what I always sort of found was helpful was having a discipline, right? Having rules in place that are followed 99.99% of the time. Um, the other thing that I find, and this is maybe it's different with retail, but with some of the hedge funds I worked at, you're supposed to lose money on hedges, right? And some people don't understand that, and that ends up kind of ruining, their hedge, because they try to be cute, and they end up, kind of like not wanting to lose money on their hedges. Um, the other thing that I would say is when I used to hate it. I don't know why. It was a pet peeve, but so many people that were around me would talk about where they got in on a stock, right? Like, but well, I bought it at 32. I don't give a shit. When you woke up this morning and that position was on your books, whatever it closed at yesterday, yeah, that was your decision to buy it, right? So unless you're some tax guru that and no shit that I don't like, okay, maybe there's a tax play that I'm unaware of. But almost every circle that I ran in, we were all short-term capital gains. So I never ever cared where you got in on a stock. That should not dictate a decision, because guess what? If I buy something at 30 and sell it at 28 and that stock goes to 10, that's a great fucking trade. Great trade. Should have I shorted it? Yes. But guess what? I just saved so much money. So that's one thing. Get that whole mentality of where you bought something out of your head every single day. Whatever price that starts at, you're choosing to own it at that price. And then as far as like portfolio, sometimes you want to take the blinders off, right? Because if you're net short, take your shots on a long. If you're long, maybe take your shots on a short. But when it's the same direction as your portfolio, that's when it can get dicey. I remember in the middle of financial collapse, we were net short, 2008. I should have made $1 billion, but it was so hard. But we were so negative. And I remember it was a day, I don't know, we were like net 40% short. Morgan Stanley of all, was blowing up. People thought it was going to zero, was trading at $5. And I was like screaming to the guy that I worked with. I was like, fucking let's buy 1 million. And he was like, no, it's like, it might go to zero. And I was like, if it goes to zero, do you know how much money we're gonna make? Like, that's a great trade. He didn't, stock was like at 20, like, a day later. So yeah, I would just say, discipline is probably number one. I have some friends who are card counters, right? In blackjack. And it's very similar. There is a math to it, and it requires you to do the same thing every single time with no, no, like, well, no, I'm feeling good today. So I think that's probably number one, is have a plan and stick to it.
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree with that, because especially here in the retail world, we also get a lot of people compare their results, compare their entries, compare whatever their trade basically to their peers, their their friends and stuff like that. And we know comparison is the thief of joy. So definitely agree with you there.
Right.
The other question I've got.
Actually, wait, can I just one amendment to?
Yeah.
So before I was saying to you guys, like, try to help other people, but the rule to that is, if you make a bad call, you better pick up that fucking phone and call that person and take it. Like, people who duck and don't sort of take responsibility end up sort of not lasting. And if you give me, let's say you give me a shitty call, and then all of a sudden, like, I can't get in touch with you for a week, like, that relationship's over. So it's okay to make a bad call, but own it. So sorry.
No worries. The other thing I was going to wanted to touch on was, you mentioned this guy. You said you've had different guys that you was working with. You mentioned this trader who had the perfect markup, had the perfect, everything was done to the T, right? But when he came to pulling the trigger, he didn't have the balls.
Yep.
So this could be very same thing here in the retail world as well. So how does one work on that? So you could have everything, you can have your markup perfectly done. You could have shared it with so many other friends and got the same opinion on it. So when it comes to it, how maybe would some of you guys, some of the professional traders, hedge fund traders, would approach these kind of problem to the entries?
I mean, there is a little bit of feel to it. For this guy, he just had no appetite for risk. But you'll come across people who have like unhealthy appetites for risk. I think the key is a long track record, right? So if you're in your first year, even your first sort of 2 or 3 years, you don't necessarily need to be a hero. You want to play the long game. If you're still trading 15, 20 years later, my guess is you've done pretty well. So I think it's a matter of getting comfortable with certain situations. The more trades that you actually execute, the more things that you're going to recognize and you're going to spot situations. I don't know. Did that answer it?
Yeah, for sure. The last thing I wanted to touch on was your passion. So you mentioned something earlier. You mentioned that, for you personally, it wasn't the love of the markets. It wasn't the watching price action. It wasn't you being in front of the computer. For you, it was just the life that you was addicted to, that you wanted to, live the fast life. So for entrepreneurs, for traders, whether you're retail, whether you're building your own hedge fund, what should be your main drive to achieving the success?
It's interesting because I wrote something up for a friend of mine. His name's Jesse Itzler. He's a huge entrepreneur. He owns the Atlanta Hawks. He's married to a woman named Sarah Blakely, who started Spanx. And what I explained to him was, as an individual, would you buy yourself as a stock? If you were a stock, would you buy yourself, right? And so you need to sort of make sure that you are a stock that you would want to invest in. And for me, passion is really important, right? It's paramount. So can people do a good job if it's something that they're just checking boxes? Sure, it's possible. But so, like, that's why I wanted to align myself with something that I was passionate about, because when I'm passionate, like, I'll work all day because it's not work. And you want someone who's got a good balance sheet, right? Like, expenses low, revenues high. And so I kind of try to look at myself occasionally as be like, well, would I buy me? And so passion has always kind of been something either that I ignored or I followed, and I do much better when I follow it.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so that's pretty much all of my questions. I do have one last thing though.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a project. Taking it as if you have a book coming out. Is that true or?
No, I
Okay.
actually, in 2018, I signed with a Hollywood manager. So I'm working on some film and television projects.
Okay, cool. Any sneak peek that you can talk about or not really?
Not yet,
Okay.
but
Okay, cool.
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, of course. So what we'll do is I'm gonna open up the chat box now. If you guys do have any questions, just put it in. We might take one or two before we do hop off. We're gonna keep it within the 1 hour limit. So plug in your questions there, and then we're just gonna take one or two, guys. Don't spam the comment box, please, as well. But other than that, I'm just gonna obviously say that. So Turney, thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time
Of
here.
course, thank you.
You didn't have to do that. And actually, one thing I do want to say, when I remember when I was talking to you on Instagram, when I said, "Oh, thank you so much," I was obviously trying to keep my hype. I was trying to keep my emotions because you said you was gonna do this. But one thing that stood out for me, and I think for me, in my opinion, right, I would say that's what I think kind of gave you your success as well. And it was, when I said, "Oh man, that's it's gonna be the greatest thing. You're the greatest," and he was like, "No, I'm not the greatest." There
I'm
also,
not.
and then there's so many other people, that just showed like you're such a humble guy. Do you know what I mean?
Thank you.
And as I said, I think because you're humble, and then because you talk so highly of relationships and you value relationships so much that obviously that's what I think gave you the success, especially back in the days in the Wall Street where you had to do face-to-face conversation and deal with. So appreciate your time, man. As I said, you are one of the most humblest guy I know. So
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time for coming on, sharing your story, sharing the gems. And the question here is, how do you think about emotional attachment to money? So that's the question. So what do you think about emotional attachment to money?
It's real. Um, it it isn't simple, right? Because money does fix a lot of problems. And being comfortable is great. Um, it becomes a problem when you attach it to let's say an internal um feeling or emotion. If you need it to make yourself feel better, that's when it becomes unhealthy. Uh, a guy that I kind of became friends with wrote a book called For the Love of Money, and it was about wealth addiction, which is a real thing. Um, Look, I mean, making a lot of money is fun and it's awesome, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make you a better son. It doesn't make you a better father. It doesn't make you a better friend. So as long as you have that in check, make as much money as you can.
Perfect. Awesome. And last question we are going to take for the day is, what are the best methods for gaining access to more capital?
To more what? Capital?
Capital, yeah.
Well, making money, making your own capital. That's to me, if I was sort of faced with that today, I would probably have like a 3-year horizon, right? Um, if you're going out there trying to raise a bunch of money really fast, it's probably not going to be the right money. It won't be sticky, and uh, you know, it's kind of like cutting corners. So one thing, and I wrote this article for CNBC for graduating classes, but one of the things I did correctly early on was so I got a job at Morgan Stanley, and I but 2 weeks into it, I take my sheet of paper of all the people that I had met, and I bring it into a conference room. And sorry, so I start calling these people, right? So I call this guy Mike. I'm like, hey Mike, it's Turney. He's like, sorry, we don't, we still don't have a job over here at Lehman. I was like, no. I want to let you know, I got a job at Morgan Stanley, private wealth management. I'm really excited, but I wanted to thank you, for all of your help. So I went through my entire list, called, 20 people. But 6 months later, I called 18 of them because, you know, the others didn't really respond. And I said, oh, you know, just want to let you know I passed my Series 7. You know, I'm super excited. I'm going to take the 63. And so what ended up happening was over a 5-year period, that list of 20 people I'd met with that I did not get jobs with was now down to 5, right? But guess what? I had 5-year relationships with these men who were managing directors on 5 different trading desks on Wall Street. And so now in hindsight, what I realized, what I do pretty good at is planting seeds, right? So very often people want to harvest, you know, immediately. And that's usually not how it happens. So planting seeds that will bear fruit a year from now, 3 years from now is important. So you constantly want to be planting good seeds. So that kind of goes back to your original question. If I'm trying to raise money, there's no quick fix. So over time, I would be continually trying to sort of make connections, work with people, and learn as much as I can in order to raise money. So I would be planting seeds.
Perfect. Awesome. So as I said, guys, we are going to bring this to an end now. So Turney, I appreciate you. But before
Yeah,
you
you're
go, I
welcome.
do also want to congratulate you as well for a year of smoke free, I believe.
Yes. 1
So
year.
guys, put a 111 there for Mr. Turney, who 1 year of smoke free. I believe you've saved like 7,000 something, right?
Yeah.
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 So there you go. If you want to raise capital, there you go. You got $7,000 right there.
Totally.
But guys, thank you so much, Mr. Turney. Thank you so much for hopping on.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate everybody. And I'm gonna upload this call as well for those of us who couldn't plug in at that time. Thank you once again, and I'll catch you guys later.